Well, it's another day and another demo. This one is going to be on a salt box. Now, the salt box has been around for a long time. It's a great place to put your kosher sea salt in and keep it on your kitchen counter. The things that it needs to have is a lid that can be moved with one hand. If you've got a pot of something that you're cooking or mixing in one hand and you need a pinch of salt, you can just reach out with one hand, get your salt, and close your box. It's important that it doesn't slide when you try to push the lid. So on the bottom is a rubber O-ring, and the rubber O-ring will prevent the salt box from slipping on the counter. It doesn't need to be very big. It doesn't take up a lot of room. It's a good addition to any kitchen. And in just a minute I'll show you how to make one. Okay, we will begin to turn the salt box by simply taking the blank and putting it in the chuck, and then we'll turn the exposed portion round. Now, we have our piece round. The next step is going to be to turn a tenon on this end and cut the groove for the O-ring, and we'll go ahead and do that. Okay, now we have the O-ring groove cut and we have a tenon, and we'll simply take this, reverse it, put it back in a smaller chuck and turn the rest of it around, and then we'll continue turning the salt box. Now the overall length that we need for the salt box is 2.5 inches. So we're going to mark that off at a little over 2.5, because we're going to lose a little bit when we cut the lid off. Now we just need to part that off. Now we have our salt box cut to length. Now we need to turn it to the 3 inches in diameter. We're a little bit over 3, so we'll take it down until we get right to our 3 inches. Now we're at 3 1/64, so I'm going to stop there. And now we're going to actually mark where our lid is going to go. We need 3/8 of an inch for that lid. Now, because this lid is going to be held on with magnets, we need to actually find a way to actually establish the center point for each one of the magnets while the lid is still on. Now, the best way to do that is to drill a hole, a small hole, all the way through the lid and into the body. So when we cut the lid off, we have a mark on both sides, and we can use that for the center when we drill for the magnets. But we need that center first, and the best way to get that is to simply decide which orientation we're going to have. Now when we look at the piece all the way around, we're going to have a small knot right here. Most of that knot will turn off when I cut the foot. We've got a little bit of interesting grain right here. That might be the best part to put forward, so we'll put the magnet on this side. Now the first thing we need to do, of course, is to find the center. where we want to put that. So if this portion is going to be in the front, we would simply put our mark on the back side. Now I know about how much room I need. I'm going to have to be 1/4 of an inch in. So I want that to be exact. So I'm not going to use a tape measure. I'm going to use my calipers to get that 1/4 inch. So there's where I'm going to drill a 1/16 inch hole. Now I'm going to go to a drill press and just simply drill that 1/16 inch hole, and then I'll be back and we can separate the lid and turn the box. Okay, we're now ready to actually cut the lid off the base. I've got a jig that I use. I just put the chuck onto the jig and it goes through the blade perfectly square. And I wind up with a very smooth cut that requires very little sanding. And now I have my base and the lid separated, and I have the hole in both places, so I'll have my center point for the magnets. So the next step is going to be to cut the cavity in the base, and we'll do that in just a moment. Okay, we're set up. We've got the chuck back on the lathe. I've got a Jacobs chuck in my tailstock and a 2-inch box core bit that will drill my hemispherical hole in the bottom of the base. Now I've found that about 550 to 600 RPMs is about right for using this large a bit, and it's just a matter of going in until you get to the correct depth. I want to go 1.25 inches, so we'll do that slowly. Now, I've got a hemispherical hole drilled in here at 1.25 inches deep, so it gives me enough depth for the salt cavity. I know it's exactly 1.25 inches deep because I counted the revolutions when I advanced the quill. My quill advances 1/16 of an inch per turn. So I just gave it 20 revolutions. That gives me 1.25 inches deep. So now this is finished. What I want to do now is clean up the front of this and get it perfectly square. The best way to do that is with a large surface. If you take a large flat surface and put it against anything on a lathe, it will sand it down completely flat and completely square to the center line of the lathe. And I'll show you that in just a moment. Okay, now to do this sanding, to get this perfectly flat, I just take what I know is a flat surface, This particular piece is 3/4 inch Baltic birch plywood. I just get my sandpaper on it flat. I can turn this up to about 800 RPMs. And by just holding it over the entire thing, that ensures that the entire rim is perfectly flat and perpendicular to the center line of the lathe. It's a very simple method to use. Now that first piece of sandpaper was 220 grit, but since this is going to be the final sanding on this surface, I'm going to go ahead and go to 320. And now I've got my final sanding on it. Now I'm going to sand the cavity as well. While I'm here, I'll start with 220 grit. And finish up with 320. And now we have the cavity completely finished. Our next step is going to be to actually drill the holes for the magnets, and I'll do that off the lathe. But I will leave the piece on the chuck, because once I get the magnet holes drilled, get the magnets glued in, and get the lid positioned, we'll put the whole thing back on the lathe, and we'll turn all of the outside at the same time. And I'll hold the lid on first with the tailstock and then with some tape. And I'll show you that in just a moment. Now, before I can drill the hole in the lid for the magnet, I need to get this surface completely finished sanding. It needs to be completely flat and sanded to about 320 grit. Now, to do that, I don't use any kind of machinery because it's the results are not that good. So what we're going to do is use what I call a Norwegian steam-powered sander. Normally I have a piece of MDF with the sandpaper actually glued down, but I can get exactly the same results on the top of my table saw. And we'll just simply turn this over, and it takes a few minutes. I start with 120 grit. I rotate it in my hand several times. This eliminates the possibility of me having more pressure on one side than the other, and that way I can get it perfectly flat. Now, once I have it sanded to where I've got all of the bandsaw marks out of it, then I can switch to the 220 grit, and we do exactly the same thing. And we get all of the 120 grit scratches out of it, and then I can switch to the 320 and do the final sanding. And then I've got all of the sanding marks out, and it's nice and smooth. So this is now ready to drill. Now, drilling the holes for the magnets are probably one of the more difficult things about doing the box. The problem is that the depth of each hole is very critical. As we measure the magnet's thickness, this particular one is just a little bit over 1/16 of an inch thick. And all of the dimensions that I give you here on this video will probably not apply to the magnets that you wind up with. The dimensions of magnets vary widely in thickness and in diameter. Some of them are in inches, some of them are metric. So it just depends on which magnet you buy. But the general rule is I don't flush up each one. I don't want them to be flush with the surface of the wood. I want one extending up a little bit, and I want one depressed back into the lid, so that when I put them together, the hole for the lid actually goes down over the magnet in the base. So it gives a much more positive fit, and there's no slip that you would get if you just had each magnet flush. So since the magnet is about 1/16 of an inch thick, I need to drill the hole in the base to about 1/32, which will allow me a little bit of protrusion once I glue it in place. And drilling a 1/32 inch deep is not the easiest thing to do by eye. So it just takes a little practice. But it's important that the magnet in the base protrude up about half its thickness. So we'll try to get that down to about 1/32 of an inch. And again, I'm using the hole that we drilled earlier. And then we'll test fit that. And it needs to be just a little bit deeper. Now that was a little bit too deep, but what I'll do when I glue this one in, I will simply add a layer of the epoxy on the bottom, which will hold the magnet up a little bit more. And of course the best way to get the magnet out of a hole is with another magnet. So our base is finished. Now, since we want the base magnet to protrude a little bit, when we drill the hole for the lid, we're going to have to drill that a little bit deeper. We want that to be back in a recess so we have room for the lower magnet to go up into this hole. So we will try to get that drilled a little bit deeper. And again, we're using the hole that we drilled earlier as our center. And that too is a little bit deep, so we'll have to leave a layer of glue on the bottom of that one as well, so we can get the magnets at the correct depth. it's actually better to be a little bit deep because you can always make up the difference with glue. The next step then is going to be to glue the magnets in place, and we'll show that in just a moment. Now, when gluing in magnets, the biggest single problem that you have is the possibility of putting your magnets in backwards. If you're not careful, you will wind up getting the polarity reversed, and your magnets will not attract one another, they will repel. So you have to make sure that you get the polarity in correctly. The way I do it is I put both the magnets on top of one piece, slide one magnet off, put this one down, then this one I flip over. Now when I put that in here and flip the lid back over, now the polarity is correct. The next step is simply mix up some glue and get them glued in. Okay, we have the glue, and the secret here is to get enough glue in the hole to hold it, but not so much that it's going to make a mess. So I use a popsicle stick that I have ground to a shape that I know works well for me. Now, we've got to remember I need to add a little bit extra because I need to elevate this magnet in this hole a little bit. Now, I've got it right on top. I'm going to slide it right into the hole and press it down. And it's just about the height that I want. Normally I put both magnets in with one mixing of 5-minute epoxy, but for this I'm going to have to do them separately, so we won't worry about the other one just yet. I would like to get the excess glue off. Now the best way to do that is just put a little acetone on a rag or a paper towel and gently wipe away the excess. The acetone will dissolve the 5-minute epoxy and remove the excess, and that will pretty much take care of that. Now I'm going to mix up a little bit more glue and we'll get the other magnet installed. Now we have the magnet installed in this one and we have it at the correct depth. We've cleaned all of the epoxy off. And then when it comes time to install the magnet in the lid, we'll do it exactly the same way. And then once we have the correct depth, what I've done is I have set the depth and locked it that this protrudes up. Then I will simply use that to set the depth of the magnet over here. So I know that this magnet is the correct depth, so when I put them together, the lid will go all the way down on the base and the magnets will be in contact with one another. Okay, we now have both the magnets glued in and they're dry, and now we can test fit the lid to the base. You just align the magnets, they will automatically align themselves, and the space that we have in the lid, in that recess, will go over that magnet, and it gives you a very positive fit. And the grain lines up very well when you do it this way, and you have a nice tight fit between the lid and the base. Now the only other thing we have to do to it is turn the outside, and we'll do that in just a moment. Okay, we're back at the lathe now, and we have the chuck mounted with the base and that magnetic lid. Now, what I need to do is hold this lid in place while I turn the two pieces exactly the same. There's a little bit of a gap. I misaligned one of the magnets, and it's off less than a 64th of an inch, but it's what I'm going to want to clean it up. So I need to hold it with a live center in my tailstock, and this is just a tool that has a blunt face instead of a point. So I use a simple piece of, it's a nylon scrubbing pad, a buffing pad, that I've just cut a square off of, and that will pad my lid and not mar the top while I put a little pressure on it. And I'm going to line it up on the sides, put just enough pressure to hold it in one place, and then I'll be able to turn that without any misalignment. And that's all I wanted to do, was to get the two matched exactly. And since this is going to stay straight, it doesn't need to be on when I turn the body. So now all I have to do now is measure out for the foot, and I'll be able to turn that. So we just measure up a 1/2 inch and then a 1/4 inch. And now I just need to part this 1/4 inch in to a 1/2 inch, and that will give me the room I need to turn the foot. Now, I'll just use my caliper to measure that depth. That's at 3/8, and I need to go to a 1/2. I just need a 32nd of an inch. And now I could just use my bowl gouge to start rolling both of these. I won't be able to do the whole thing because I can't get in there all the way with the bowl gouge. So I'll switch to a spindle gouge. Now we'll switch to a bead cutting tool. It's a 1/4 inch. I'm going to have to adjust that tool rest. Okay, I have that bead turned, and now all I have to do now is finish fairing in the foot. Now that's all the turning I'm going to do on this. All I'm going to do now is sand this and get it ready to polish. And this part will be finished. And there's nothing worse than a video that shows you how to sand. So I'll do that off camera, and I'll be back in just a little bit. Okay, now we have the box sanded. We have the magnets in place. The only thing left to do is to shape the top of the lid. Now, to do that, I just put the lid and the magnet in place. Now that locates it. It pivots on that magnet. So I'm going to take a small piece of duct tape, and I'm only going to tape about 1/16 of an inch, maybe 3/32. It will give me enough room to do the shaping. And I'll simply put that all the way around. And this will hold the lid in position for me to actually turn it. And it's just as solid now almost as it would be if it were still attached. The reason I didn't do this shaping earlier was because I wanted this flat when I drilled for the magnet so it wouldn't rock. So now it's just a simple matter of using a bowl gouge, and we'll take this down. And that's enough of that. The only thing left to do now is just do all of the final sanding, and then I'll cut the whole salt box base off with my jig on the bandsaw, and we'll be ready to do the finishing. Now, we have the salt box completely finished now. It's been completely turned and sanded, and it's ready to polish. The magnet on the lid makes it very easy to get it on and off, and it spins around very easily. And now we'll just simply take these two parts and buff them, and then we'll be finished with it. I'm going to buff it with a 3-part buffing system. It's called the Beal Buff system. It's available from Beal Tools. You set it at about 700 RPM, 1700 RPMs. You put a little bit of the correct buffing compound on each of the 3. And you just hold the piece against the buffing wheel until you've buffed the entire thing. And it's really just that simple. It puts a nice buffed appearance to it. This is the coarser of the 2 grits. And you just continue to buff until the entire piece is finished. And watching that is almost as much fun as watching sanding, so we're not going to go through the entire process with all of it. We just apply the correct grit to the correct wheel. You go through the process, and when you finish, you have a nice polished piece. And I will show you that as soon as I get done with the whole thing. And there we have it. The salt box has been polished. The O-ring's been installed, and it's ready to go.